Welcome to G Fun Facts Online. Today, we are going to dismantle one of the most persistent and iconic narratives in the story of human evolution. For decades, if you opened a textbook or watched a documentary about the origins of humanity, you were presented with a singular image. That image was Australopithecus afarensis, better known to the world as Lucy. The story went that between 3 and 4 million years ago, Lucy's species walked the East African Rift Valley largely alone. She was the lonely ancestor, marching on a linear path toward the genus Homo, and eventually toward us. That narrative has been comfortable, simple, and linear, but as of late 2025, that narrative is also completely obsolete. We are going to explore the groundbreaking findings published this year that have finally solved the decade-old paleontological mystery known as the Bretelle foot. We are going to reconstruct the world of the Pliocene, not as a lonely road, but as a crowded, experimental stage where multiple different types of human ancestors lived, breathed, and walked side by side. This is the story of the Deyiremeda mosaic. To understand why the recent 2025 discoveries are so revolutionary, we first need to transport ourselves to the Afar region of Ethiopia. This is the Woronzo Mill Study Area, a geological treasure trove located just 50 kilometers north of Adar, the famous site where Lucy was discovered. This landscape is a layer cake of time, preserving the remains of our deep past. For the last 10 years, this region has been the center of a confusing scientific detective story. The trouble began back in 2012. A team of researchers recovered a partial foot, catalogued as specimen BRTVP273 from the Bretelle locality. This foot was a shock to the system. By 3.4 million years ago, we assumed that hominin feet had become fully committed to terrestrial bipedalism. Lucy's foot, for example, possessed an inline big toe, creating a stiff arch that allowed for the push-off propulsion we use today. It was a foot made for walking on the ground. But the Bretelle foot was different. It possessed a divergent, opposable big toe. It looked less like a human foot, and more like the foot of an ancient Australopithecus, or even a chimpanzee. Yet, paradoxically, the other bones in the foot showed adaptations for weight-bearing bipedalism. It was a biomechanical contradiction, and for years, it existed in limbo. Who did this foot belong to? Was it a deformed individual of Lucy's species, or was it something else entirely? The plot thickened in 2015, when Dr. Johannes Haile Selassie and his team announced another discovery in the same region, fossilized jaws and teeth dating to the same time period. These jaws were clearly Australopith, but they were wrong for Lucy. The cheekbones were pushed forward, the lower jaw was incredibly robust, and the tooth enamel was thick. They named this new species Australopithecus, Deyiremeda. In the local Afar language, Deye means close, and Remeda means relative. A close relative, but a distinct stranger. So, for a decade, we had a set of robust jaws and a mysterious grasping foot found in the same general area. The question haunting paleoanthropologists was whether these parts belonged to the same animal. Finally, in November 2025, a landmark study published in Nature connected the dots. Through the discovery of new intermediate fossils and precise stratigraphic correlation, we now have confirmation that the opposable toe belonged to the robust jaw. Australopithecus Deyiremeda was a real, distinct creature, and it possessed a mosaic of features that defies the old linear models of evolution. Let us paint a picture of this creature, because Australopithecus Deyiremeda is a fascinating study in evolutionary experimentation. It is called a mosaic because it combines traits from the distant past with features that foreshadow the future. If you were to look it in the face, it would seem eerily modern in some respects compared to Lucy. The cheekbones, or zygomatics, are positioned anteriorly, meaning they sit further forward on the face. In later hominins and modern humans, this architecture helps dissipate the massive forces generated by chewing. Combined with a heavily built, thick lower jaw, this suggests that Deyiremeda was a chewing machine, capable of processing very tough materials. Interestingly, its front teeth, the incisors and canines, were relatively small. Lucy's species had larger front teeth, likely used for stripping or gripping food. Deyiremeda seems to have abandoned that strategy, focusing entirely on the crushing power of its back teeth. But as we move down to the feet, we step back in time. This creature walked on 2 legs, but it did not walk like us. The divergent hallux, or big toe, meant that its foot could splay outward to grasp tree branches. It was an arboreal specialist. When it was on the ground, it likely used a flat-footed gait, lacking the springy toe-off that makes human walking efficient. It likely used a lateral push strategy, shifting weight to the side rather than rolling forward. This realization forces us to reimagine the landscape of the Middle Pliocene. We often see documentaries depicting infinite open savannas, but the Afar region 3.4 million years ago was a mosaic environment, a complex patchwork of ecosystems. Along the banks of ancient rivers, there were dense gallery forests, dripping with fruit and providing heavy shade. Beyond the riverbanks lay open woodlands filled with acacia-like trees and shrubs, and further out, the open grasslands were beginning to expand as the planet cooled. Australopithecus Deyiremeda was not alone in this world. We now know that it shared this landscape with Australopithecus afarensis. Fossils of both species have been found just 35 kilometers apart. They were neighbors. But the neighborhood was crowded with other characters as well. There was Therapithecus oswaldi, a giant relative of the modern Galata baboon. Unlike the omnivorous hominins, this giant monkey was a specialized grazer, sitting in the meadows consuming vast quantities of grass. There were giant forest pigs called Notocurus ualis, and ancestors of modern elephants roaming the woodlands. And, of course, there were predators. Saber-toothed cats like Dinophilis and Homotherium, and the hyena-like Chasmoporthetes prowled this mosaic. In such a dangerous world, the ability to climb trees was not just a lifestyle choice, it was a survival strategy. The most pressing scientific question regarding this coexistence is ecological. The competitive exclusion principle states that two species cannot occupy the exact same niche at the same time. One will inevitably outcompete the other. So how did Lucy and Deyiremeda live side by side for hundreds of thousands of years without driving each other to extinction? The answer, confirmed by updated isotopic analysis in 2025, lies in niche partitioning. They managed to survive by doing completely different things. Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis, was a generalist. Chemical analysis of her teeth shows a dietary signature that mixes C3 plants, forest foods like fruits and leaves, with significant amounts of C4 plants, which include grasses and sedges. Lucy was the jack of all trades, capable of foraging on the forest floor or venturing out into the open grasslands when necessary. She was adaptable. Australopithecus Deyiremeda was different. The isotope data for this species is distinct. It shows a strong, almost exclusive preference for C3 foods. Deyiremeda was a specialist. It relied on the fruits, nuts, leaves, and tubers found in the wooded and riverine areas. It largely ignored the expanding savanna resources. This dietary divergence allowed them to dine at the same restaurant, but order from completely different menus. When the dry season hit and soft fruit became scarce, Lucy could turn to roots and grasses in the open. Deyiremeda, however, likely relied on harder, tougher forest foods, nuts, bark, and woody tubers. This explains the robust jaw and forward-facing cheekbones. They were adaptations for high-stress chewing of tough forest materials. The locomotor differences reinforced this separation. Lucy was a committed terrestrial biped, efficient at walking long distances to find dispersed resources. Deyiremeda, with its grasping toe, was the arboreal master. It could navigate the canopy with an agility Lucy lacked, accessing resources high in the trees and using the vertical space to avoid predators, and perhaps to avoid Lucy herself. There is another layer to the story that makes the presence of Australopithecus Deyiremeda even more intriguing: the question of technology. In 2015, archaeologists discovered stone tools at Lomekwi 3 in Kenya, dated to 3.3 million years ago. These tools are large, clunky, and predate the genus Homo by 500,000 years. They were created using a passive hammer technique, where a stone is bashed against a stationary anvil. For years we wondered who made them. The prime suspect was Kenyanthropus platyops, a flat-faced hominin found nearby. However, the anatomy of Deyiremeda, specifically that powerful jaw and flat face, has led leading anthropologists like Fred Spoor to suggest a connection. Deyiremeda shares facial similarities with Kenyanthropus. Some researchers now hypothesize that they might be regional variants of the same group, a clade of flat-faced hominins distinct from Lucis lineage. If Deyiremeda or its kin were the Lomekwian toolmakers, it implies that the cognitive leap to stone tool use was not sparked by the harsh open savanna, as we long believed. Instead, it may have begun in the woodlands, perhaps as a way to crack nuts or process the tough vegetation that formed their specialized diet. So what does all this mean for our understanding of human evolution? The confirmation of Australopithecus Deyiremeda is the final nail in the coffin of the linear evolution model. We can no longer view our history as a straight line from Australopithecus anamensis to afarensis to africanus to Homo. The Middle Pliocene was a period of rampant speciation, a bushy tree of life. We now see a diversity of forms. We had the generalist, Australopithecus afarensis, the survivor who was adaptable and widespread. We had the forest specialist, Australopithecus Deyiremeda, the climber with the powerful jaw. We had the western stranger, Australopithecus Bahr el-Ghazali in Chad, showing us that hominins had spread far west into Central Africa. And we had the flat-faced enigma, Kenyanthropus platyops in Kenya. This diversity mirrors what we see in other successful mammal groups. Just as there are multiple species of antelope or pigs on the savanna, evolution threw several strategies at the wall to see what would stick. There were many ways to be a hominin. Why, then, are we the only ones left? And why did Lucis lineage seem to be the one that continued toward us? The answer may lie in the changing climate. As the Pliocene cooled and the world dried out, the forests shrank. The specialized woodland and arboreal niche of Australopithecus Deyiremeda likely contracted. It was a creature built for a world that was disappearing. Luce's good enough bipedalism and her ability to eat grass-based foods may have been the key adaptations that allowed her lineage to endure the drying world. Deyiremeda was a highly successful biological experiment, but ultimately it was a specialist in a changing world. The story of the Bertelle foot and the Deyiremeda mosaic teaches us a humbling lesson. We are not the inevitable result of destiny. We are the survivors of a diverse and competitive family reunion. 3.4 million years ago, a human ancestor looked across the Afar River Valley. It stood on a foot with a grasping toe, chewed a tough tuber with a heavy jaw, and perhaps watched a group of Lucy's species walking in the distance. They were neighbors, rivals, and cousins, living two very different lives on the same earth. The Pliocene was not a lonely time. It was a crowded, vibrant, and experimental era, and thanks to the science of 2025, we can finally see the full cast of characters.